Today I'm going to look at the concept of author intention and how this might affect the possibility of different interpretations. It has been suggested that if one knows what a writer intends or intended to say, then one has the correct interpretation of the particular piece of writing. In this understanding, any other meaning that is suggested is considered defective and invalid because it strays from what the author actually meant. This idea of author intention, however, needs further scrutiny. Often, author intention is cited as the basis for determining meaning. What did the author mean to say? Find this out, and you have an absolute answer to what something means. The first problem with this is that author intention is not readily available. Even if the author is still alive, they do not necessarily know the intent of their own composition. A famous quote that possibly has its origin in German literature and the works of John Paul Richter, who died in 1825, was translated into English. It is said that Richter was asked about the meaning of a particularly difficult passage he had written. Richter's reply indicates the challenge with depending on the author in order to derive the true meaning of what is written. "My good friend," said Richter, "when I wrote that passage, God and I knew what it meant. It is possible that God knows it still, but as for me, I have totally forgotten." Further to this, the author is often unwilling to reveal any meaning beyond what is already written. This leads to my second point. This is the question of whether author intention can be anything other than what is written. For example, if you were to ask the author of some song lyrics what they meant, the answer is that the lyrics mean what they say. One cannot, for example, say perfectly what a poem means in other words, because the other words can never perfectly state what the poem itself says. To say something in other words is also to say something different. It is not that one cannot say the same thing differently, it is just that this very idea is a contradiction in terms. If I say something differently in order to say the same thing, then my point of departure is difference and not a repetition of the same. Also, if I want to say something in other words, then that implies that the original words are somehow deficient and need further elaboration and explanation to make sense. But whenever other words are used, one is dealing with an interpretation. One can never be sure that this interpretation is the correct one, simply because there are many ways to say something in other words. In 1976, the Blue Oyster Cult song "Don't Fear the Reaper" was released. The song is clearly about death, hence the reference to the Grim Reaper in the title. There's also an explicit reference to Romeo and Juliet in the lyrics.
Romeo and Juliet are together in eternity. Romeo and 40,000 men and women every day. 40,000 men and women every day.
In the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, the two lovers commit suicide. This led certain interpreters of the song to suggest that "Don't Fear the Reaper" is a call to commit suicide. When questioned on this in an interview some 20 years later, the writer, Buck Dahmer, had the following to say about the song. "I was actually kind of appalled when I first realized that some people were seeing it as an advertisement for suicide or something that was not my intention at all. It is like not to be afraid of death as opposed to actively bring it about. It's basically a love song where the love transcends the actual physical existence of the partners." Notice that Dahmer specifically mentions his intention. This intention excludes the notion of suicide. Quote, "I was actually kind of appalled when I first realized that some people were seeing it as an advertisement for suicide or something that was not my intention at all." Unquote. Dharma disputes that Don't Fear the Reaper is a call to commit suicide by stating that his intention as the lyricist was not this at all. I think this is fair enough. No doubt it is offensive to infer suicide when it is completely alien to the intended meaning. Dharma cannot be blamed for interpretations of his lyrics that diverge from his intended meaning. Of course, one could argue that if you don't want your lyrics about death to imply suicide in some or other way, don't use two people who killed themselves as your prime example. The point here is that the inference of suicide does seem to have some evidential basis in the actual lyrics of the song, notwithstanding the fact that the songwriter did not intend this understanding. This raises questions about interpretation and the validity of how lyrics are received and understood by the reader or the listener. If I hear and understand something differently to the author's stated intention, am I disqualified from understanding it this way because it disagrees with the author's intention? By way of an indirect answer to this question, consider the following points. 1. All we really have is the text or the words as they are written in a poem or book, or the words that are sung in a song, or the words that are spoken in a play or a film. The meaning is to be found here and not elsewhere. 2. Once authors release their work into the public space, it ceases to be something in their control. 3. There are obviously different ways of looking at any work of art. Nevertheless, not all interpretations have the same weight or validity. They are not all equal. Some interpretations are better than others. 4. Bad or illegitimate interpretations are a reality and may be governed by agendas and biases and contain misunderstandings that cannot be sustained by a careful reading of the text. 5. A totally definitive, single, ultimate answer to what something means, whether it be a song, a book, a movie, or whatever, is not really available. This does not alter the fact that we may have a preferred understanding that stands above all others in our own minds. So then, does the author have the final say on the meaning of their own work, assuming they are available to speak? I would suggest that they do not. Their interpretations should be subject to the same levels of deliberation as any other. Do the actual words and lyrics match the interpretations that are suggested, even one that is suggested by the author? That is the burden. Interpretations are slaves to the words they represent, not the one who wrote them.